Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this adorable little mini wallet. You can put stuff in either of these two little pockets here. This is made out of one strand of yarn, but I've got this one here where I used double strands of yarn to get this look. And it does make it a little more bulkier, but it makes a really cute little wallet. For today's tutorial, I'm going to be using Bernat Maker, and it is a size 5 bulky weight yarn, and I'm going to be using the color clay. You can find this on yarnspirations.com. You are also going to need a 6mm hook and a 14mm bead. To begin, you are going to chain 26. In the second chain from your hook, you're going to make a single crochet. Now chain 1 and skip 1. Single crochet in the next stitch. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. You are just going to continue doing that all the way across. So this is what your piece should look like at the moment. We're going to chain 1, but we're going to chain 1 loosely because we're going to be working back into that chain later. We're going to skip that first single crochet, and here is our chain 1 space we made. Now in the linen stitch you would normally put it in the chain 1 space, but for me I'm going to put it down into the foundation chain. I often refer to this as a drop stitch. I think it's also known as a spike stitch. You're just going to put your hook in that foundation chain stitch and make your single crochet. We're going to chain 1, skip the next single crochet, look for that chain 1 space, and down below it we're going to put our hook in that chain stitch. This is just going to clean up the stitch pattern and make it look less gappy. So chain 1, skip 1, single crochet down into the foundation chain, and you're just going to repeat this process all the way across till you get to the last stitch of the row, and when you do stop, I'm going to show you what to do. So here we are at the end. This is the last single crochet stitch. We are not going to be putting any single crochet in the top of a single crochet. So you're going to skip over this single crochet and look for the turning chain below. There's 2 little tiny vertical bars. That is the turning chain, which is why I tell you to chain loosely at the end of each row. So we're going to put our last single crochet stitch in our turning chain. And this is what it should look like. So now we're going to chain 1 very loosely because we're going to work back into it later and turn. Now we are going to skip our first stitch and go ahead and start the linen stitch, which is just making a single crochet in the chain space and not in a stitch below. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet in the chain space. Repeat that all the way across. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and when you get to the last stitch of the row, I'm going to remind you what to do. So here's our last single crochet right here. We're going to skip over that and into our turning chain, which is right here, which is a lot easier to see because I'd made it so loose. We're going to make our last single crochet. And this is what your piece should look like. So essentially you're going to repeat that last row that we just made until you have a total of 15 rows. So just continue doing that until you have 15, and I will meet you back here. So here you should have 15 rows. Go ahead and grab a stitch marker. We are going to use it as a sort of guide. Now from where we left off, count over to the 14th stitch, and I am counting chain stitches here. So count all the way over to the 14th stitch of the row. And by the way, it should be a chain stitch. So as I'm showing you here, this is a chain space, and that should be the 14th stitch. So we're just going to continue doing our stitch pattern until we reach that stitch marker. So we're going to loosely chain one and turn, skip that first stitch and single crochet in the chain space, chain one, skip one, single crochet. And you're just going to repeat that till you get to the stitch marker. Now here we are at the stitch marker. You are going to place a stitch in that space. So that is our last stitch of the row. You should have 14 stitches counting your turning chain, of course, or 7 single crochet if that's easier for you. We're going to leave the rest of this row unworked and we're going to continue on. Loosely chain one and turn, and we're just going to continue the stitch pattern as before. And of course, make sure your last single crochet is in the turning chain and not the top of that single crochet. So you're just going to repeat that last row until you have 29 shorter rows. So start counting at the row that contains your stitch marker. And once you have 29 rows, I'm going to meet you back here. So this is what your piece should look like. You should actually have a total of 44 rows if you count from bottom to top. And your piece should measure approximately 12.5 inches long at the longest portion here, or about 32 centimeters. And then at the tallest portion here, or the widest portion, it should measure 6.5 inches, or about 17 centimeters. So you're going to leave yourself a really long tail. This tail was actually almost not long enough. So go ahead and make yours a little bit longer than mine here. We're going to use it for sewing. First, we're going to take care of this shorter strand that we started with. So grab a large tapestry needle, and we're going to weave that tail upwards until we get towards the stitch marker level. We're going to leave that there because we're going to tie these ends together at the end. So you can go ahead and remove your stitch marker, and we're going to thread the longer tail onto the tapestry needle. And we're going to fold this in a specific way. So find the imaginary line between this portion right here of the last 29 rows that you made and fold it to the left, just like that. Now we are going to sew all 3 layers together, starting at the area where we fastened off. So we're going to go all the way around the perimeter, and I am just whip stitching. You can do it however you like, but I do think that the whip stitching looks very nice. You can barely tell it's there. Just make sure that your stitches are consistent. You don't want them to be too tight. So just continue on. And here I wanted to show you, there's 3 layers here, and you want to make sure that you catch all 3 layers as you go across when you're doing your whip stitch. So just make sure that you're catching all 3 layers as you whip stitch across. And last but not least, we are going to whip stitch up this last side and fasten off and weave in our tails. And now we are going to add a button. You could add a magnetic snap or a regular snap to the underside here and be done with it if you wanted a more masculine look. But I'm going to add a bead to serve as a button. You could also use an actual button here, but I like the beaded tassel look, of course. So I'm placing my bead at the level of rows 3 and 4. So between the rows 3 and 4 at the top center. And then I'm just knotting off the ends here to secure the bead in place and weaving those tails in. And then of course you're going to find the chain space that's in the center, and that is going to serve as our buttonhole. It's just big enough, which is why I say 14mm bead is just right. You might get away with a 15mm bead, I don't know. And so now I chose to add a tassel to the chain space right here. And I just used my fingers. I'm just going to loosely wrap my fingers 5 times. If you want to use a piece of cardboard, it's about 4 inches. And then I cut the bottoms to create the tassel tails. And then you're going to want to open your wallet with the wrong side facing of the flap and grab your hook. We're going to draw all 5 strands of one end through. And now you're just going to make the ends even. It doesn't really matter if they're perfect. We're going to cut them later. And we're going to use the gathering knot to secure it in place. And if you watch me carefully, I'm doing the gathering knot here. So I just created that loop, and then I'm wrapping around the tails and the loop at the same time. And then I'm going to take this longer end through that loop and pull up on the shorter end, and that is simply going to draw that knot to underneath the area that we wrapped. And then I'm just going to cut this top one to the quick. And I decided to close the flap before I cut the ends. And I'm going to cut them about the level of the bottom. And if you are selling these, I do recommend that you treat the tassel bottoms, especially if you're using this particular yarn, with like some sort of fabric glue or fray check, which I get this from any craft store really. It's really great to keep your ends looking nice, and since a wallet tends to get a lot of use, I would definitely do that. But otherwise, you are done. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial today. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.